Welcome to Midnight Horror. Sit back, relax, and maybe grab a cup of tea or coffee as we dive into the captivating world of this tale. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss out on our future exciting videos. Did you know that you never really know who your neighbors are behind closed doors? This chilling fact sets the stage for our exploration into the unsettling theme of creepy neighbor horror stories. It's a fear many of us can relate to. The eerie sensation of living next to someone you barely know and the potential dangers that may lurk just next door. Our sense of security can easily be shattered when faced with the reality that danger could be just a few steps away. Story 1. The Mysterious Noises. Emily had always felt safe in her suburban neighborhood, but that changed one fateful night. She had lived next to Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who kept to himself. He was polite enough, but seemed to avoid long conversations. Emily thought nothing of it until she started hearing strange noises in the dead of night. It began with faint scratching sounds that seemed to come from the walls. Emily dismissed it as rats or maybe an old house settling, but the noises grew louder and more disturbing. One night, she heard a soft, continuous tapping, like someone knocking gently on her bedroom wall. Her heart pounded in her chest as she strained to hear more. One evening, as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard a whisper, an unmistakable, chilling whisper of her name. "Emily! Emily!" Her blood ran cold. She knew it wasn't her imagination. She decided to investigate. Gathering her courage, Emily went to Mr. Thompson's house the next day. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Curiosity and fear gnawed at her. She peered through a window and saw something that made her stomach churn. The living room was filled with old photographs of her, taken without her knowledge, displayed on a wall like some macabre shrine. Terrified, she called the police. They discovered a hidden passageway connecting the two houses, and within it, evidence of Mr. Thompson's obsession with her. He had been living a double life, watching her every move through small peepholes he had drilled into her walls. Mr. Thompson was arrested and Emily moved away, but the memory of his whispered voice still haunts her. Story 2. The Silent Observer. James and Sarah had just moved into a quaint apartment in the city. Their neighbor, Miss Green, was a quiet, middle-aged woman who rarely left her apartment. She seemed friendly enough, always giving a polite nod when they crossed paths in the hallway. However, something about her felt off. One night, James noticed a flickering light from Miss Green's apartment. It was unusual, considering she never seemed to have visitors or much activity in her home. He brushed it off as a trick of the light, but then strange things began to happen in their apartment. Sarah's jewelry went missing, only to reappear in odd places. The couple heard faint footsteps in the hallway at odd hours. One night, James woke up to find their bedroom door slightly ajar, even though he was certain he had locked it before going to bed. They installed a security camera in their living room, hoping to catch any intruders. What they found was far more disturbing than they had imagined. The footage revealed Miss Green entering their apartment through a shared ventilation system. She would watch them sleep, sometimes standing just inches away from their bed. Her face, expressionless and eerie, loomed over them for hours. James and Sarah confronted Miss Green, who denied everything. The police found her apartment filled with their personal belongings, including items that had gone missing years before they moved in. Miss Green was taken into custody, but the couple couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They moved out shortly after, unable to live with the haunting memories of their silent observer. Story 3. The Friendly Facade. The day we moved into the quaint suburban neighborhood, the sun was shining and the birds were singing. My husband Jack and I had finally found what we thought was our dream home. The two-story house had a charming exterior with white picket fences, a spacious backyard, and enough room for our growing family. Our daughter, Emily, who had just turned 8, was ecstatic about her new room with its large bay window overlooking the street. As we unpacked, neighbors came by to introduce themselves, bringing welcoming smiles and homemade cookies. Everyone seemed friendly and eager to get to know the new family on the block. Everyone except for the man who lived in the house directly across the street. Our first encounter with Mr. Peterson was anything but welcoming. It was late in the afternoon, and Jack and I were taking a break from unpacking, sipping lemonade on our front porch. That's when we saw him for the first time. Mr. Peterson was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s. He had a gaunt, sallow face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He stood at the edge of his yard, just staring at us. There was no smile, no wave, just a cold, unblinking stare. "Hello there!" Jack called out, trying to be friendly. Mr. Peterson didn't respond. He just turned around and walked back into his house, disappearing behind the heavy curtains that always seemed to be drawn tight across his windows. "That was weird," Jack said, shaking his head. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. There was something about Mr. Peterson that didn't feel right, something unsettling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As the weeks went by, our lives slowly returned to normal. Emily started school, Jack settled into his new job, and I busied myself with setting up the house. But Mr. Peterson remained a constant, eerie presence in our lives. Every morning, when I walked Emily to the bus stop, he would be there, standing at his window, watching us. Every evening, when Jack came home from work, Mr. Peterson would be out on his porch, staring silently as Jack pulled into the driveway. One night, I decided to do some gardening in the backyard. As I dug into the soil, my shovel hit something hard. Curious, I dug deeper and unearthed an old, rusty metal box. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age. They were pictures of our house, taken from different angles and at different times of the day. There were even pictures of the previous owners, captured in candid moments. And there, in the background of every photo, was Mr. Peterson, always watching. I showed the box to Jack, and we decided to ask the neighbors about Mr. Peterson. We learned that he had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, but no one knew much about him. He kept to himself, rarely spoke to anyone, and had no family or friends that anyone was aware of. The previous owners of our house had sold it suddenly, and no one knew why. The more we learned about Mr. Peterson, the more the sense of unease grew. It wasn't just his odd behavior, it was the way he seemed to be everywhere, always watching. Emily started having nightmares, waking up screaming about the man with the scary eyes. She would point to her bay window, insisting that Mr. Peterson was standing outside, watching her. One night, after we had put Emily to bed, Jack and I decided to confront Mr. Peterson. We walked across the street and knocked on his door. There was no answer, but we could see the flicker of a television through the curtains. Jack knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door creaked open. Mr. Peterson stood there, his eyes as cold and unwelcoming as ever. "Yes," he said, his voice raspy and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Peterson, we need to talk," Jack began. "We've noticed you watching us, and it's making us uncomfortable. Is there something you want to say to us?" Mr. Peterson's expression didn't change. "I watch because I need to. It's my duty." "Your duty?" I asked, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he simply closed the door in our faces. Jack and I stood there, bewildered and more than a little frightened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mr. Peterson's cryptic words. What did he mean by "it's my duty"? I decided to do some investigating. The next day, while Jack was at work and Emily was at school, I went through the house, looking for anything that might explain Mr. Peterson's behavior. In the attic, I found a dusty old trunk. Inside were more photographs, similar to the ones I had found in the garden. There were also old newspaper clippings about missing persons, all from our town. Some of the articles were decades old, but one in particular caught my eye. It was about a little girl who had gone missing 25 years ago. Her name was Sarah, and she looked eerily similar to Emily. My heart pounded as I continued to search the attic. That's when I found the door. It was small and hidden behind a stack of old boxes. I pushed the boxes aside and opened the door, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. I hesitated, but something compelled me to go down. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder the further I descended. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were jars filled with strange, preserved specimens. There were also more photographs, including recent ones of Emily. In the center of the room was a small table. On it was a diary, its pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it and began to read. The diary belonged to Mr. Peterson. It detailed his obsession with our house and the families that lived there. He believed that the house was cursed and that he was the guardian, tasked with protecting the neighborhood from the evil within. Shaken, I hurried back upstairs, clutching the diary. I called Jack and told him everything. He came home immediately, and we decided to confront Mr. Peterson once and for all. This time, we were determined to get answers. We marched across the street and pounded on Mr. Peterson's door. He opened it, his expression as cold and unreadable as ever. "We know about the room," I said, holding up the diary. "We know what you've been doing." For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in Mr. Peterson's eyes. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he said. "You don't understand." "Then help us understand," Jack demanded. "Why are you doing this?" Mr. Peterson sighed and stepped aside, allowing us into his house. He led us to his living room, where he finally began to explain. "I've lived here my whole life," he said, his voice trembling. "My parents were the original owners of your house. They were part of a secret society that believed the house was built on cursed land. They performed rituals to keep the evil at bay, but it required sacrifices." "Sacrifices!" I repeated, horrified. "Yes," he said. "Children, to be exact. My parents offered up my sister Sarah, but it wasn't enough. The curse demanded more. When my parents died, I took it upon myself to continue their work. I watched every family that moved in, waiting for the curse to manifest." Jack and I were stunned. "You're saying our daughter is in danger?" Jack asked. Mr. Peterson nodded. "The curse is real, and it's growing stronger. Emily is the next target." My blood ran cold. "What do we do?" "There's a ritual," Mr. Peterson said. "A final one that can break the curse for good, but it requires a willing sacrifice." I looked at Jack, my heart breaking. "There has to be another way." Mr. Peterson shook his head. "I've tried everything else. This is the only way." We were faced with an impossible choice. But as parents, we knew we couldn't let our daughter be harmed. We decided to perform the ritual. That night, under Mr. Peterson's guidance, we prepared for the ritual. We gathered in the backyard, around the spot where I had found the metal box. Mr. Peterson drew symbols in the dirt and lit candles around the perimeter. Emily, unaware of the danger, watched with wide eyes. I knelt beside her, holding her hand. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," I whispered, hoping I believed it myself. Mr. Peterson began to chant in a language I didn't understand. The air grew colder, and a dark presence seemed to descend upon us. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a cold wind whipped through the yard. "Now!" Mr. Peterson shouted. "Offer the sacrifice!" Jack and I hesitated, but before we could move, Mr. Peterson stepped forward. "I will do it," he said. "I will be the sacrifice." He walked into the center of the circle and knelt. The wind howled around him as he continued to chant. Then, with one final, deafening roar, our last story today. Megan always believed in the good in people. When she moved into her new home, she was delighted to meet her neighbor, Mr. Evans. He was charming, always ready with a smile and a helping hand. He would bring over freshly baked cookies and offer to help with her garden. Megan felt lucky to have such a kind neighbor. However, things took a dark turn when Megan started dating Tom. Mr. Evans's behavior changed drastically. He became overly protective, warning her about Tom and suggesting he wasn't trustworthy. Megan shrugged it off as friendly concern, but Tom felt uneasy. One night, Tom stayed over at Megan's place. In the middle of the night, he woke up to find Mr. Evans standing in the living room, holding a knife. Tom tackled him to the ground, and Megan called the police. They discovered that Mr. Evans had a history of obsessive behavior and had been watching Megan for months. The most chilling discovery came later. Megan found a hidden trapdoor in her closet that led to a small room under her house. Inside there were photographs of her, detailed notes about her daily routine, and disturbing drawings. Mr. Evans had been planning something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Megan moved away, but the trauma stayed with her. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and the friendly facade of Mr. Evans haunted her dreams. Conclusion: these 3 bone-chilling stories remind us of the potential dangers that can lurk just next door. The fear of living near unknown individuals is a common one, and these tales serve as a stark reminder to be cautious and aware of our surroundings. Our sense of security can be easily shattered, and we must trust our instincts when it comes to our safety. Have you had a chilling encounter with a neighbor that still haunts you to this day? Share your stories with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling tales that will keep you up at night. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and always trust your instincts. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.